Well, after what's been entirely too long, I am finally set up and ready to do another video on tying Puget Sound sea run cutthroat flies. I've been extremely busy this last 6-8 months. As some people know, I'm now the sole owner of South Sound Skiffs, the saltwater fly fishing guide service I helped start here the last couple years. And that transition is meant for a really busy winter. Things are settling down now. Business is going good, but I'm a little more organized, and a lot of the errands and paperwork and all that stuff is done. So thought I would finally get down to tying a fly. Plus, I've heard complaints from Chuck on Instagram many times that he's ready for some more videos. So this one's for you, Chuck. So today I'm going to be tying a flatwing baitfish pattern. Lots of people know of me that I've never been a huge flatwing guy just because they're a little time consuming. However, over the winter I started messing around with them more and more, and I hate to admit it, but they have been outproducing everything for big cutthroat the last couple months. As much as I hate spending more than 10 or 15 minutes on a fly, these things are actually a lot of fun to tie, and they just flat out catch fish. They swim so nice, they look great in the water, they sparkle, they move, they just catch fish. So the way I'm going to be tying this fly is very untraditional. I'm using UV resin to attach the feathers instead of tying them in. The reason I do that is what I've found when tying flatwings, and I've read this in books and things, is the feather you choose is important. You cannot just take any feather, cut it to length, and use that, because the stem on these things is super thin and almost round all the way down until you hit this fluffy, webby part of the feather. And then the stem transitions into a much thicker, stiffer, easier to tie in piece. So if you try to cut this to length to make a shorter feather and tie it in, it's never going to lay flat for you, or at least I've never been able to do it. You tie it in right back here, it's really not that difficult, it'll lay nice and flat. The problem is, I'm trying to tie like a 3.5 inch fly for sea run cutthroat. I don't need, if I tie this in at the proper place, this is like a 7-inch, 8-inch feather. I mean, it's going to be an absolute monster of a fly. And that's not going to do me any good. So what I found is that I can use UV resin, and I'll show you that. It's very non-traditional. I'm sure some people will groan watching this, and that's fine. It works very well for me, and that's ultimately all I care about, but thought I would share the way I do it here. If you're interested in learning how to tie these flies, there's a lot better sources than me, that's for sure. I didn't come up with any of this. I borrowed all the information from some local tyers. Britta, Justin Waters, Sean Larson, who ties for Gig Harbor Fly Shop, I think. Follow them on Instagram if you really want to see some awesome flatwing patterns. This is stuff that they've been tying, and I'm just more or less copying them with my own stuff. So just want to put that out there. If you really want to learn the history and the traditional method and all the cool stuff about these flies, I think Britta offers some flatwing classes every year. Check that out. I'm sure it's fantastic. She's an amazing fly tyer. Ties the most beautiful flatwings I've ever laid eyes on. So I'm going to go ahead and just get started. For a hook here, I've got a Kona Universal Strong Streamer hook, size 4. I've been tying on these the last few months, and I really like them. A really stout hook, a little bit heavy, which is nice for these flies. It'll help them keel over and ride properly. And just a really sharp, really high quality hook. I really am impressed with these things. For thread, I'm just using some mono. I don't remember the size. It's mono uni thread. I like mono on these flies because it allows the colors to kind of shine through at the head. You can use whatever threads you want. So to get started, I'm just going to lay down a thread base as per usual. I'm going to wrap back all the way to the basically the barb. Right there is good. And first step is some white bucktail. Now, if you watch normal videos on tying any sort of flatwing flies, they recommend taking the bucktail from the bottom third of the tail. Reason being, these hairs are much more hollow than the upper hairs, so when you cinch down on them, they're going to flare out. And I think in a traditional flatwing, that flare is desired because it provides a little, it's the foundation more or less for the whole, all the feathers and things that you tie on top of it. But this pattern, I don't find that flare really is as important, so I'll just use whatever bucktail I got. So I cut off a little chunk, and I'm just gonna thin it out, pull out any of the short underfibers and anything wonky that sticks out. As you tie these flies, always be thinking in terms of sparse. If you overdress these things, they're not going to look right, they're not going to swim right, they're not going to fish right, at least in my opinion. So always err on the side of sparse. So got that kind of where I want it, and now I'm going to kind of measure it out. I just want it 1.5 inches or so behind the hook. Again, this is just kind of provides a support for the feathers, a foundation. And again, if you watch a lot of videos, they will tell you to tie this such that it flares. I don't personally care at the moment, so I'm just tying it in. Now, next thing I do is I take some Solaris bone dry UV resin, really thin, fast curing resin. I'm going to put some right there on the tie-in point. I do that with a lot of flies just for durability. But then I'm going to take and I'm going to run some of this stuff a ways up the bucktail, back the bucktail here. And the reason I'm doing that is it stiffens this bucktail up, and it really helps prevent fouling. Again, this is just works for me, so I do it. So this is, you can see it's just a little stiffer, and since this is basically a foundation, it helps. So next step is going to be a white feather. That's just the color combination I'm using. The fun thing about these flies is you can just go nuts. You can tie them in as many colors as you want, different flashes, different materials. That's one thing I really enjoy about these things. So got this long feather, and I'm just going to take and put a cut in it, and then I'm going to peel off fibers until I get the feather to the length that I'm after. Again, I'm going for an overall, 3 to 3.5 inch fly with this one. So I'm just going to kind of strip it back until it looks good to me. Looks pretty good. And then I'll take and just trim that stem back just a hair, just to make it more manageable. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some more of that UV Solaris bone dry. I'm going to put a fairly decent little amount right on top here where I'm going to put this feather. And then I'm also going to take and just put a little bit on the feather itself where the tie-in point is. And then I'm going to just kind of lay this feather right on top where I want it. It's a little bit tricky until you get the hang of it, but it's really pretty simple. And then get it where I want and shoot it with the light. Now that feather is secure, it's not coming out. When I first started doing these, I just did a few to see how the durability would be. I was a little concerned, but I've never had anything come out the back of these. These feathers are not going anywhere. Once that's set, I'm just going to take and put some wraps. Probably don't even need them with that UV resin, but whatever. Oh, as an aside, I'm using some new scissors here. These are an Italian company named Copter, K-O-P-T-E-R. Just got these not long ago, and they're very impressive little scissors. I got 2 pair. This is the curved style. I've never used curved scissors before, but I find that I really like it. You can really get in over the top and in close for good cuts. Really, really nice scissors. If you're interested, I have a little thing for tying scissors and tying tools, so anything new, I like to get my hands on it. And these are really cool. Made in Italy. There is a US rep. There's more than one. There's one in Washington. I know that because he's who I got these from. Anyway, back to tying. So I got that feather is on there. Got some wraps over it. Now I'm going to take a little bit more resin and just kind of make sure that it fills in all the gaps, and it's just redundancy. Make sure that thing is good and secured. Next up, I'm going with some flash. I'm using some this is DNA hollow chromosome flash. I've mentioned it before. It's my favorite, and I'm going to take maybe 4 strands or so. Cut those off, and I'm going to double this over, so it's actually going to be more like 8, 9, 10 strands of flash. I want to make sure that the ends of these aren't just flush. They're kind of broken apart, at different lengths. And that's just so that they kind of each little piece of flash will move individually in the water and kind of undulate and sparkle. And I'm going to measure that out about the length of my feather. You can make it shorter, you could make it longer. Doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference. This is how I like to do it. Get that tied in, and then I'm just going to fold the other half over. And then since that's a little long, I'm just going to take and trim those ends. And again, I want them to be different lengths for the most part, just so they move better. Okay, so now I'm going to go with a chartreuse feather. Traditionally, it seems that when you tie in your first feather, if you watch videos, read books, whatever, it'll tell you to tie it so the concave, it's curved up. Concave side is curving up. And then the next ones, they go the opposite way, the concave side curving down. I think that goes back to just that support. That first feather is kind of a foundation for the rest of this. With this particular pattern, I don't find that really matters. So I just tie them in. Glue them in, I should say. So I'm doing the same thing here. I'm just getting this to the length that I want. I want it about the same length as that white feather. Back to my trusty UV resin. Put some more on there. A little bit more on the feather itself. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to lay it on there, get it where I want it, and zap it. Now you can keep going with this. You can, depending on the size of the fly you're doing or whatever, you can add, there's multiple feather flatwings and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 feathers, some bigger flies. For this one I'm just using these 2 because I just don't find it necessary. Now you see how there's kind of a bulky tie-in point here, and in most flies I would tie in right behind the eye so that the whole thing stays even. Got a good body, kind of doesn't get bulk, but with this fly I don't find it matters because once you're all said and done, you're really not going to see this at all, so I don't care that it's ugly. So next up I'm going to add some crystal flash. This is chartreuse crystal flash. I'm going to do it the same way, basic way that I did the DNA. I'm going to make sure that the ends are a little uneven. Measure it out. Tie it in. And then fold over the other side. I like to make these ties fairly flashy. You can use as little or as much as you want, of course. I tend to use quite a bit of flash. Okay, so my next step is I've got some silver flat diamond braid. Just going to tie that in. Come back sort of to the tie-in point of the feathers and the flash. And I'm just going to wrap a little bit of a body here. I'm not going to make this too long because I really want to save room on the shank here. You'll see how that kind of develops here shortly. Okay, so now I have a body, a little shine through and from the underbody there. Next up, I've got just some chartreuse bucktail, and I'm going to cut off a little chunk of that. don't necessarily want this to be the super hollow hairs, so I take it from the, the top 2/3 of the tail. And I'm gonna pick out any under fur and kind of thin it out. Again, think sparse. And I do it all the time. The biggest mistake I make with these flies is tying them too full, and that's fly tying in general, of course. But it seems with these patterns, it's really important. So I have a really nice, thin, sparse piece of bucktail here. I'm gonna measure that out. I want it to be almost the length of the feathers, but maybe not quite. You can experiment with that and see how you like it. All it does is kind of affects the overall taper and the profile of the fly when it's all said and done and it gets wet. I'm just going to tie that bucktail in right on top, right where the diamond braid ends, basically. Okay, so now I'm going to add a little bit more flash. This is Northern Lights flash from Fly Tier's Dungeon. I've mentioned their website a lot. I use this stuff. Northern Lights is just really cool flash. I don't know. This comes in cool colors. It moves well. I got way too much here. Don't need a ton. I'm going to same concept. I want the ends to be uneven as best I can. This stuff can be a little bit unruly to work with, but it's okay. Okay, so I'm going to measure that out against the bucktail. I want it, somewhere in the same length of the bucktail. It can be longer or shorter depending on your taste. Tie that in. Now I'm going to flip this upside down and take some white Congo hair, again from Fly Tier's Dungeon. So this is going to be my belly, so I'm going to measure this out, and I want it to be a little bit shorter than the bucktail. If you look at the herring or most of the baitfish in Puget Sound, the belly doesn't cover the whole body. It tends to be a little shorter, the white belly. So I'll just kind of measure that out where I want it. And I'm going to tie that in. And then take it and kind of work it past the hook on both sides until it lays flat. Okay, it's going to be my belly. Now I'm also going to add, this is UV minnow belly flash, and I'm just going to take a little chunk of this. I don't know, not too much. Again, we're thinking sparse here, but I do want to get some flash on the belly. So a little bit of that. Pull out a few more of those fibers. It's a little much. And then I'm going to tie that in right there on top of the white Congo hair. And then I'll just take in, I'm not going to have it be super long, not all the way back even to the Congo hair. I'm just going to take and kind of trim that a little bit. And then I'll do the same thing, kind of work it down past the hook. That just adds a little bit of sparkle to the belly side is all. It's definitely not necessary. But so now I'm going to come back over the top here on the top side, and I've got some more Congo hair. This is the Congo baitfish, and this is chartreuse needlefish color. It's a really nice chartreuse with kind of some hints of yellow and maybe a little bit of white in there. I just like the color. Again, the fun part of these flies is that you can really experiment. I haven't tied any two the same way. It's use a little of this, a little of that color, this color. It's a lot of fun to play around. So I got this. I'm just gonna thin it out, sparse, sparse, sparse. Especially with the synthetics, it seems you don't want to overdo it. It can, especially if you add too much synthetic on the belly or the top, it can cause the fly to swim sideways for some reason. I don't really know why that is, but what I do know is this fly, when it swims sideways, will still catch fish. In fact, I almost believe that sometimes they fish better when they swim kind of goofy, so I don't let that bother me if it happens. So I've got that kind of cut to length. I want it more or less the same length as the bucktail. Tie that in nice and secure. And then I'm going to add, this is a hot chartreuse crystal web, and this is also from Fly Tires Dungeon. It's a flashy synthetic material. I'm just using it because, well, why not? It's kind of soft, it looks cool. So I'll take not too much, cut that off, make sure I get any of those short ones out of there, and I'm just going to put that right on top. I'm going to thin that out even just a little bit more. There we go. So, tie that in on top. See the shape kind of taking form here. I'm going to flip this back over, and I've got some bright red Congo hair, and I'm going to just cut off a nice little piece of this, sparse as well. This is going to simulate the gills. Who knows if this is necessary, but as I've mentioned before, I do this to pretty much any of my bait fish patterns. I like to add some red for gills. So, nice little, just sparse piece. Trim those ends, and I'm going to tie that in on where the belly kind of. And then I'm just going to trim this. I only want about maybe 1/8 of an inch. Does not take much. And then that's going to be it for the materials. I'm going to clean up the head a little bit and put a whip finish on it. Now, to finish off this fly, I'm going to be using a fish skull fish mask. This is a size 4. These things are freaking awesome. They're just little plastic heads that slip over the front of the hook, and once you add eyeballs, you get the similar effect of a epoxy head, only they're just super simple. So you literally just slide it right over and glue on eyeballs. You can use super glue or whatever to secure it. What I've been doing is using this Solaris thick glow-in-the-dark UV resin, and just seems to make the head pop a little bit more. I don't know if it really makes a difference, but I like it. So I'm going to just take and get some of this on there. I don't need a ton, but I do want it enough that it can kind of fill in inside of this head, and then when I hit it with the light, it'll really secure that. I got a winky red fiber there that's driving me nuts. So you just take this thing and you slide it on. Try not to make too giant of a mess if I can, but there we go. I'm going to use this hackle stem to wipe up that little bit of excess. Now once it's on there, I'm going to kind of push it around a little bit. I really used too much resin on this guy. Okay, so it's on. I'm just going to kind of look at it from the front, make sure it sits straight and it kind of sits where I want it, and then I'll hit it with the light. I'm going to let this, well, leave the light on it for a little bit longer than I ordinarily would, just to make sure that that is good and set and secure. You can certainly just use a normal, adhesive eyes and UV resin or epoxy to build the head. These things are just so convenient that I've kind of become a big fan of them. Produced by the Flyman Fish Company. They make some pretty cool stuff, and these little helmets or fish masks are right at the top of the list. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my thread, and I'm just going to put down a thread dam in front of the fish mask, and that's just to help ensure that it doesn't slide off the hook. It shouldn't with the UV resin securing it, but better safe than sorry. Okay. For fuck's sake. I can't catch a fucking break, can I? Where? Okay, so the last step is going to be to add the eyes. These are 4mm just red adhesive eyes from Fly Tires Dungeon. I find that these 4mm is kind of the perfect size for this size 4 fish mask. And there's on each side for the eyeball there's a recessed spot where it goes, so you just kind of lay it right on there. And I'm going to take some more UV, the Solaris, and make sure that I get that whole thing covered up good so it's not exposed and could possibly come flying off if it hits a rock or something. Put a little bit on my thread dam there as well, just for GP. That with the light. You can see how that head glows. I think it's pretty cool, but who knows if it makes it fish any better. I'll do the same thing on the other side. Put that eyeball on. Kind of get it where I want it. And then more bone dry UV resin. Oops, eyeball wanted to slide out. I used a little too much resin there. Seems to be the theme for this video. And then hit that with the light. And that's going to be it. And what you're left with is, it's nice, especially when it gets wet. This gets nice and laid back and slick. It's got all this little flash kind of moving in there. It's got the flatwing hackles at the back fluttering around. These things just fish extremely well. My favorite way to fish these, I'm usually from my boat, but I'm using, depending on the current, I'll use anywhere from a Type 3 to a Type 7 airflow 40 plus line, and these are more or less, these are unweighted. I didn't add any weight to it, as you noticed. They're almost neutrally buoyant. So with I use a faster sinking line, and the line kind of will drop down, and then as you retrieve this, that line being below the fly will kind of make it dive, and then the neutral buoyancy, when you pause, it will pop back up, and it'll dive, and it'll move all around. I'm here to tell you that it's super effective. The grabs have been absolutely savage when these things are working well. And this particular pattern right here has outfished pretty much everything on the water for cutthroat the last, say, 2 months. So again, this is a little different way of doing it. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it or the right way to do it or anything like that. This is just how I do it because I'm lazy and I can't find the length of feathers that I need in any sort of numbers. So using the UV to attach these things works well. They're a little more involved to tie, but they're a heck of a lot of fun, and you can go nuts in colors and materials and however you want it. Anyway, give this one a shot. Add a few to your box. If they work for you, leave me a comment. I'd love to hear about it. And thanks for watching.